Quad 66. When you're dealing with micro drones, sometimes nothing works. Literally, just sometimes nothing works. Sometimes, however, not as frequently probably, everything works. And this happens to be, fortunately, one of those times when everything works. I got both ExpressLRS and Ghost both working properly with my radio, which is nice. I didn't have to buy a new radio. And so the issue, as it turns out, this is that old problem with Frsky ACCST. You need to do, and so this was figured out back in the Crossfire days. I didn't realize that this problem, nobody mentioned that this problem would pertain also to ExpressLRS and Ghost, but as it turns out it does, and the fix is already there, and so that's kind of nice. So what you see right here is the inverter mod. It's pretty easy to install. It's soldering 4 wires and pulling off one little resistor or something like that, and not too big of a deal. The hardest part about the mod was actually unscrewing all the screws that hold the board on, because the one thing is on the back of the board, so you got to pull the board off and flip it over to get the one wire soldered on. And this soldering is a little tight, but if you are used to building these little micros, then this soldering is no big deal. But anyways, so that's been out, and it's super cheap. This thing is like, I ordered it for like, shipping was more than the parts, like a $2 part or something like that, $3 part. But so that's awesome. Got it working. So what it does, the problem was with this ACCST, it wasn't syncing correctly in the OpenTX, and that led to these problems where what's interesting about it is it led to 2 different problems. In Ghost, what it led to was, if you looked at the feed-forward trace, it led to these like spikes, and they're kind of like regularly there, and but it manifested that way in Ghost as these spikes. ExpressLRS, it manifested in a different way. In ExpressLRS, it manifested as just a bunch of noise, just fast noise, and pretty big noise, like, you know, in terms of the feed forward. It was a notable amount of noise. And what was kind of interesting about that too is that with the problem, as it were, ExpressLRS was still flyable. It just had noise in it. And versus Ghost actually had more problems where it was pretty unhappy being flown that way, particularly with what I thought were grumpy motors. I'll get to that in a second though. But the good part is now I have everything working, and I have 2 modules that both work. We've kind of got this like Fatboy FBB printed, you know, case on, you know, the ExpressLRS model, big ridiculous antenna. Ghost obviously looks a little bit slicker, nicer form factor, a little smaller antennas. This one beeps, this one doesn't. The thing I do like about Ghost is that the binding is easy, and it doesn't involve any kind of like going into setting the passphrase and things like that. You kind of bind it in a more traditional way, and it binds easily. So that's nice. And obviously both receivers are teeny tiny. I've got the ExpressLRS. So these are the new Happy model ones, and this is the one with the ceramic chip antenna. So this is just super awesome. I mean, you know, size proportion, right? This is super tiny. So, and with that chip antenna, this is really like this is the ideal for doing these little micro builds, because you got this little ceramic chip antenna, and because we're using this RC link that's so superior, you can get away with this tiny little chip antenna, and your you know, your reception on it, your signal quality is gonna be just fine. It's gonna be solid. You're not gonna run into any problems in the types of spaces and distances that we're flying these little guys. I think that was the one part where Ghost's probably biggest miss for the micro world is that they didn't do the ceramic chip antenna. They went with the little like mini style Immortal T. They call them cuties, and I'm sure that antenna has way better reception than its ceramic chip, but who cares? You know, we're not flying these things far, and when the antenna is basically like weighs almost as much as the receiver and is gangly, dangling out, and it's got this T-shape, and it's like, it's a pain in the butt. Like, why would you deal with it? What I've been doing on Ghost is just actually using these little whips, and that kind of tidies them up a little bit, but I still hate those little Ipex connectors. I ruined one, had to solder it on directly. But point is, though, of this video, we now have two great systems for micros. It is definitely noticeable when these systems are working correctly, the level of control versus my old, so with Frsky I was flying the RXSR, the level of control difference it's totally noticeable. So with RXSR, I know my space where I fly pretty well, and so like a lot of it's learned from like repeating the same maneuver over and over, and knowing how, when I'm going into like a kind of blindish turn, how to get in there, how to get in there right, and not panicking, and knowing that I've already set my trajectory correctly and I'm going to be okay with it. And switching over to Ghost or ExpressLRS, I can fly more blind, like I can fly more on reaction rather than anticipation. So with RXSR, you kind of have to, like, you throw it in there and know it's just going to be all right, versus with this, the control is enough to where I actually feel like I'm able to like get in there, take a look, and adjust and fly through it and fly on reaction time. It really is, it's surprising. I'm surprised that it is actually that noticeable, but I do think it is that noticeable of a difference. And I think you'll notice it even more when you're flying in spaces that you're unfamiliar with, because if you don't, like, you know, my yard, I fly it so much, I know what I can do. Like, I can fly it halfway with my eyes closed. Like, if my signal cuts out for a second, I can just, like my VTX, I can probably fly and survive it, versus if you're in a space that you don't know, you're kind of done. But I do think it's notably different. And this is going to get better too, because there is a ton of work going on in Betaflight now to now optimize for these super fast RC links. We're not getting what we can get out of this. You know, there's going to be a lot going in there into like optimizing it so that you get the nice response for feed forward, not adding a bunch of jitter. One of the most interesting things I think that came out of this whole thing was the grumpy motors are no longer grumpy motors. So these motors, whether it's the frame or whatever, they've got a little resonance, and it's kind of down low. It hits the spot, and if I look at my black box, there's this spike of noise kind of around a little bit under the 200 hertz area. And part of it, the first props I put on these were a bad batch. They're blue props. I don't know, light blue. I only ordered one set, and they had more vibration, but they had a lot of vibration, but not so much vibration that should have made this quad totally untunable. So I was kind of like pulling my hair out a little bit. Once I got this one flying correctly, though, with the Ghost issue solved, these motors calmed down. There's still this peak there, but I think what was happening is that with Ghost, with that funny like spike that it was coming through the feed forward, I think that was enough to where, like, you know, if you hold something on the end and you kind of like smack it and it vibrates, and it kind of like vibrates. I think that's what was happening, was that little spike in the feed forward was hitting the motors in a way that it was starting these little micro oscillations like over and over again. And so the quad was a little jumpy to begin with, and you add that in and you're just like, you know, it's that kind of like bing kind of thing. And I think that was enough to make this quad almost like untunable. And now it's actually same exact tune. I didn't change anything, just fixed this RC command, the signal coming into it, fixing Ghost, and now it flies fine. So that was kind of a revelation. It's not tuned, it still needs to be tuned, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And the nice part about that is because although I still prefer these motors, so these are the AMAX 1103. And I know I'm going on a tangent, but I like going on tangents here anyways with these videos. So I brought you in with Ghost and ExpressLRS and fixing ACCST. And now we're going to talk about motors and things I like and don't like about motors. But anyways, the 1103s, I still prefer them, I think mainly because I feel like I get a little more top end out of it. it just feels a little bit more lively, and maybe there is a little bit of slight weight difference here, but these are now flyable and acceptable. I think this will tune up nicely, and I think it'll fly. Maybe a little slightly less exciting of a quad than I want it to in terms of top end, missing just a little bit of top end punch, but I think it's going to do pretty well anyways. And so that's nice because these motors, these GEP-RC 1202, are generally fairly available. They've been around long enough, but not too long. And so it's probably a decent motor you can jump on. It's nice lightweight. The durability on these in the past, or GEP-RC in general with the 1102s, has been really good. So hopefully these 1202s are pretty similar in durability. And that just kind of gives us a nice little option. Flight time about 4.5 minutes on some pretty darn old 300 mAh 2S batteries, and so that's pretty nice. I did a lot of digging. I was really, like, with these AMAX motors, really the ones I want are the Brother Hobby, and I found some of the Brother Hobby, but with the Brother Hobby, what did I find? I think I found it was like a higher kV. It was like 10,000 kV, which is more kV than I want. And they'll bring down the flight time, but I kind of want, I don't know. And then there's like 3-hole, but they're done. They're not making them anymore as far as I can tell. I've emailed Avant Quads a couple times to see if they're going to restock, and they are not responding to me. But it's kind of nice that these motors that we have access to turn out that they're actually pretty decent. I took one, so the nice part about being in, and it's not that I've been in FPV in the micro world for a very long time, but I've been long enough to where I've seen a couple iterations of motors and things like that. And so I actually took a flyer without having tested them, and I forgot about them before we did the motor test, but took a flyer on the old LDARC, the old King Kong 1103 motors. So they made a couple different variations. One of the variations they made was a 3-hole mount, so it was M2s on 9mm with a 3-hole, which is kind of awkward. I think it's not bad, but they also made a slightly heavier with a 4-hole, and it's 1103, 7,800 kV, and those are the motors on their 100mm Flying Egg, so it's kind of an older quad. But I kind of remember way back in the forums, people talking about these motors being pretty nice. I think they were made by Sunny Sky. But people talking about, you know, they're actually really nice motors, really good motors, and kind of looking back at it, they have, you know, some of the advertising they have on it is the curved magnets, the arc magnets instead of the flat magnets, and so hopefully that gives you the less air gap. And so motors that I've liked, like that are more notchy, like the Sky Stars, the Hyperlights, and the Brother Hobby, have nice curved magnets and feel a little bit notchier, and hopefully that translates into, it seems like it translates into more responsiveness. But on those motors, these that I just went ahead and ordered them, partially because they're pretty cheap. They're like $9. You can get $8. One of the few cheap motors still out there. But anyways, these motors are kind of like back in the day, and what I've been seeing in the trend in the motors is like the older motors are generally outperforming the newer motors. Like these are the new V2 Flywoo NIN, and these motors just aren't very good. They're kind of heavy. They're probably nice and durable, but they're heavy and they're not super powerful or efficient or responsive. They are not notchy and, you know, kind of shiny and smooth, but and new style with a solid one-piece bell, but just don't deliver that well. And that kind of makes me afraid about the new Mamba. Mamba's got these, what are they calling them? The Toka motors. Kind of makes me a little hesitant about those because those seem like a little heavier and more bulbous than they need to be. But I kind of figured if what we're seeing is like the older motors were just simply better, like the AMAX, these AMAX motors and the Brother Hobby, maybe those were too, and maybe those were kind of like one of these gems. And I'd passed on them because they didn't have the KV, they didn't have an inversion in the KV quite high enough for when I was looking at 1S stuff, and they were a little bit heavier, on the heavier side compared to like the original Racer Star motor, and compared to like the Hyperlight motor. So I kind of passed out in the 1102. So I kind of passed over those because I was trying to go lighter with, you know, the 55mm props, 65mm props. But on these props, you know, if we're going a little bit heavier, so these are like a 3.8 gram motor, and those LDA RC motors are like a 4.1 gram motor, so a little bit heavier. But if they work, I don't know, I figured that might be a nice motor, because although it's kind of a pain, you have to order it from China and it's going to take a while, they are cheap. And just going into the website and like punching in like crazy high numbers on the motors, it wasn't like saying, you know, too high, like it was letting me order it. So I think they have plenty of stock. And LDIRC, although they do a bunch of things not very well, some of the things they seem to do is their products seem to be like available for kind of longer stretches of time. Like King Kong, they made those props, those 65mm press-on props, for like a long time. When everybody else stopped making them, King Kong was still, they're like, yeah, sure, we'll make them. And so I'm kind of hoping that maybe taking a flyer on those motors will pan out well. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But anyways, so today, now the issue I have is I have good problems. I have a bunch of ExpressLRS receivers. I have a bunch of Ghost stuff, and it both works well. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll probably end up just keeping both, because things will develop. But at the end of the day, if you made it this far, here's the conclusion though. If you're into micros and you're looking at like whoops and 1S and things like that, I think the way to go is ExpressLRS. And I think the reason for that is because this is Happy Model. If Happy Model's putting this in a receiver, and they've already integrated the longer range version, it's like the 900 megahertz version, into a whoop board, this is next. You know, this is going to show up in a whoop board with 2.4 gigahertz, and that's going to be game over for all other protocols and whoops. It's simply better. The range is going to be better, the responsiveness is going to be better, and so once you integrate that into your all-in-one whoop boards, especially for 1S, that's it. That's what you got to fly. Everything else is going to be inferior. And so I think everybody else is going to have to follow suit. And so if all of those are going to be integrated, then if you're flying that stuff, then are you really going to want to deal with switching out modules? Probably not. So probably what you're going to want to do is throw all your builds on ExpressLRS rather than Ghost, because then you're dealing with one module. You just throw in one binding phrase for all of them, and they're all bound up, good to go. If you're building, these are super cheap. And if you have Ghost receivers already, you can just flash them to ExpressLRS. And I suspect, I don't know, maybe Immersion RC will surprise me and make Ghost available to be flashed onto the receivers, because I don't think there's anything magical about, you know, the receiver hardware wise. Like, I think they're basically just using the same components. I could be wrong. I think the chips are probably going to be, you know, same chips and things like that. I mean, you can flash this to ExpressLRS. It makes sense that you should be able to flash this Ghost onto the other receivers. So if you could do that, you know, if Immersion RC surprises me and they're saying, hey, we'll let you flash Ghost onto these integrated all-in-one whoop boards, then maybe Ghost might be viable down in the micros. But if they don't do that, then and they might not, because I think their focus is more bigger quads, racing, 5-inch, long range, etc. And I can kind of tell that because, like, you know, they did a great job here with this super tiny receiver, but then kind of botched it, missed the opportunity on the chip antenna, ceramic chip antenna. Should, you know, and did the big old cutie thing, which doesn't make sense for whoops and micros, where you're flying in small spaces. Anyways, pretty serious ramble. I need to test these out. I'm sure they're going to work fine, but the ones I went with are the ones that you can update over Wi-Fi. They're currently cheaper because of the chip shortage. When chips are available again, if that ever happens, or, you know, world economy blows up because this crazy supply chain issues and inflation. But I think this is the future of micros. So that's my opinion. We'll see how it turns out. But anyways, this thing's so awesome to fly. All right, until next time. Cheers.